and you see the impact that religion has on our people, and it is shocking. I mean, just this morning, I was reading in the newspapers the juju battle which is going on in the Ghanaian Times about appointments and so on. That's the level of ignorance. And ignorance is not about those who have gone to the university and acquired degrees. It is far more than that. And if you go into our offices and you find the people who are trading juju bombs and so on, they are not the ordinary illiterate you would find in somewhere like Bumpurugu, Yoyo, and so on. These are the graduates of our universities. These are the PhD holders and so on. They are so damn ignorant, it's unbelievable. So I would end here and hope that I've managed to stimulate some discussion around the questions which have been raised.
Thank you very much, Kwesi. I had to cut him short, not because he had nothing worthy to say, unlike the lives that he described, but because, as you can see for yourselves, we have a brief, which is the responsibility of Haruna Idrisu. And because Kwesi did touch on the question of government revenue, he did touch on employment and so on. He did touch on resources that are not being developed productively. All of these go to the heart of the investment regime that we run in this country. It goes to the heart of the trade regime and the trade policy regime that we also run in this country. So with your indulgence, I need to bring Haruna up to speak. But before he does so, I think that it's only fair to give him some sense of the context and the standpoint from which we as civil society and the Economic Justice Network are coming from. So with your indulgence, I have consulted with some of you and we amended the program accordingly. I'll invite my colleague Tetteh Hormeku to speak for about 15 minutes to give Minister Haruna.
And hopefully the minister will kind of address it for us. The first is to say that we understand that our economy is in the shape in which it is now because, as Kwesi has explained to us, we have a structure of our economy which does not allow us, in all our growth development, to create jobs, to use indigenous resources, to empower indigenous human resource, national, local. And that we are going to an economy where the time has privileged resources and investors and power makers from outside the economy. Now, we all know that our government today confronts a number of challenges, right? As I mean, in power for only eight months, it confronts a number of challenges. We expect that those challenges can be addressed both in short-term measures, but as the short-term measures are outlined, there must also be a framework in the long term for repositioning an economy away from the structure that Kwesi has described. And for this purpose, a trade and investment agenda is an important element. So that's the first thing we have to do. Especially because we all know that we have grown, mining company, export has grown, but we all know joblessness has also grown. And the second question then is that within this context, what are some of the initiatives that we can discern from government action? And where are they pointing to us? And what are our worries about them? And for this discussion, I'll pick only two examples. Okay, one representing trade, in my definition, and one representing investment. With the trade relates to the area of communication, initiatives that the government have put in place over the past, 3 months, around communication services. And the way in which they try to not simply just generate revenue around communication services, but also use trade policies. That's how it has been explained, to promote maybe local services in the communication sector. We've heard about the talk tax, and as far as I understand it, it was basically to try and ensure that the taxation in telephony fulfills the role that was supposed to fulfill earlier on in terms of raising extra revenue. That one I leave aside and get more better explanation. But there's a part of which is very interesting in the phone, imported phone, the tax on it. Now, again, they may have been a very useful revenue-raising element of it, but as the thing was being discussed in Parliament, government officials came up and explained to us one of the reasons why they are raising import duties on phones, mobile phones, is to create a space for better domestic assembly of phones. Now, I don't want to go into that specific example, but because it's very good for me in the sense that the government at least recognizes that it is possible to use trade policy to promote local production. I want to submit that in that particular case, and I don't want to spend too much time on that, it is a case in which it is possible to argue that a very good principle is misapplied. Because in the Economic Justice Network, we have been advocating that our domestic producers in many, many areas need support through trade policy. The imports, as Kwesi has explained, are flooding our markets. And where we have capacity to produce domestically, long history of investment and everything are being destroyed. In the case of the poultry sector, in the case of tomato farmers, rice producers, in the case of local manufacturing industries, wire weavers, furniture, all those things. And all those industries have laid out clear strategy for production, clear capacity, where the application of enhanced duties of importation can advance them. The government's first initiative is not any of those areas where they have been proven capacity. The poultry farmers are still struggling with goods dumped. When they attempted some time ago to get the interest raised, the World Bank said, and the IMF said no, and we put it back. Over the past 4 years and 8 more months of the government of the social democratic regime, nothing has been done about that. And they are still suffering and collapsing. So we ask ourselves, is this particular initiative to use import duties to promote domestic assembly of phone an ad hoc thing or a policy framework which is going to emerge? I just put it as a question. Because the real area that we want to talk about is the investment that connects to that trade policy. And here, so far, we have had specific policies which is trying to attract a foreign investor or raise provisions for domestic investors, but we have not yet noticed any systematic framework emerging apart from the bill that has been approved in Parliament, as before the President now, relating to the establishment of the Investment Promotion Center, the revision of that bill. And that bill and what has emerged from Parliament, which before our President, is something that I'm glad the Minister is here, because the concerns that we have about them are very a bit grave. Now let us get the context right. It is not a bill to introduce a new investment center. It's a revision of the act on an existing investment center. Okay? So the government finds it necessary, and I think it's the Minister of Trade finds it necessary to revise the law relating to the investment center, which means that it has to be revised to bring into being, to bring it up to date. There is an urgency to ensure that what we have, it has been assessed, is no more adequate. We want to do something about it. Now, I want to suggest, unfortunately, that instead of revising and bringing it up to date, what we have now, which is before the President for accent, actually takes about 3 steps backwards from what we have that was being revised. To assess that an investment center with the duty to promote investment for local investors and foreign investors must be assessed by 3 criteria. 1, what's the broad investment strategy? The strategy for using investment to transform the economy within which this center fits. 2, since we know that the structure of our economy and height of the structure since colonial times up to now has been affected by the relative roles of foreign investor and domestic investor, the second issue we'll have to address: what is the balance that's attained between the relative roles, functions, rights, and merit of domestic investors versus the foreign investors? That's the second question. And 3, has the government got in the center going to look at certain proactive engagement with specific sectors of the economy that are identified prior in our investment strategy as the driving engines of the economy, and what's the role of investment in both domestic and foreign? On all these 3 counts, I think the investment bill fails. First, this is an investment center bill which is an orphan. Okay? When Kwame Nkrumah, in fact, because the investment center like this is not new, as my colleague Yalgren was pointing out to me, and I'm grateful for this information. Investment center harks back to the days of Nkrumah. When Nkrumah was talking about the investment center and giving a rationale for it at the industrial fair, where the Americans organized by industrial promotion, they were going to discuss investment center and industrial strategy. Nkrumah laid out the vision of what the industrial center could do. Talk about the role of investment in our economy, the role of private domestic investment in our economy, the role about the state sector in the economy, the role, therefore, that the foreign investment must come to fulfill, to supplement those things. And interestingly, Nkrumah put all that within the 7-year development plan. In other words, the investment center was going to be within the plan which says we are a primary commodity-dependent economy with a huge peasant base. How are we going to transform the sector to make sure that agriculture provides a different role? What's the role of the manufacturing sector? What's the role of the mineral sector? What are going to be the strategic mottos for transformation? And in that context, what is the role of foreign investment going to play, and what the foreign investment center going to do? Now, we don't have a, well, maybe I don't know, but I don't think that in the Ghana now we have a 2-year development plan, maybe 6-month development plan. We don't have a broader plan which is about transforming the structure of our economy. We may have a vision. As a Social Democratic Party, the NDC has a vision where we go, but a plan which encapsulates that vision into a certain operational element for a certain period of time, I don't know exists. So we have an investment center which is an orphan. Because of that, the investment center basically is supposed to promote investment, market it, its incentives. And it's supposed to promote investment in high technology and high skill area. Now, what is high technology and what high skill area? Which part of our economy in these dynamic days should not be considered high skill and high technology? Okay. And so the investment center is basically a promotional marketing incentive. It has a few things that it can do. When it comes to, it has got the function to do strategic things. Sorry, how many is that, Brian?
Well, I'll give you 8 more.
Thank you very much for your generosity. When it comes to the investment, the bill here talks about some strategic things that the center can do. So it says, for instance, that the board of governors of the investment center, with consultation with other institutions and approval of the president, can identify strategic sectors which are important. But it's interesting that that was in the context of promoting investment, not the situation is promoting and giving incentives to that. Now, when we are talking about investment strategy for transforming the economy, it's not simply incentives that you are going to give to particular sectors. You have to think about the whole sector, which areas certain investors should go, which areas other investors should not go. It's not simply saying, let us find out what kind of incentives in terms of tax exemptions we can give to investors. So that narrow remit that was given to the center does not meet the task of an investment strategy. So that's the first thing. The second thing, that having got the investment center as a promotional center to promote and disseminate information and tell people about what the enforcement opportunities are and hold trade fairs and things like to do that. The second question then becomes, when foreign investors come to a country, what relationship should we have between foreign investors and domestic investors, for instance? Which area of the economy should they go? What rights should they have? Unfortunately, in this area, I think that the investment bill does something which is not very good, to put it mildly, because it takes away completely from the hand of government the space and capacity for government to use investment policy to direct which areas of the economy foreign investors should go. And it's 2 areas. It has got what we call in the investment law national treatment and most favored nation clause. It says that the investment center shall not discriminate between local investors and foreign investors. It shall not give special incentives to local investors against foreign investors. And it shall not, even worse, give special incentives and good things to investors in terms of where they are coming from. So if an investor is coming from Nigeria, for instance, you cannot say because Nigeria is part of regional integration, we'll give them better incentives than investors coming from Europe. In other words, it says that all investors shall be treated equally. Now, 2 comments about this. One, there's nothing in the international agreements that we are pursuing that forces us to do those kind of things. In fact, Ghana has been in the forefront of many countries in the WTO, in the EPA, in bilateral trade, which are insisting that we need a right to be able to give differential treatment for our local investors and for investors from other areas so that we can direct them. Let me give you an example. Take Data Bank. It invests in the foreign exchange, okay, in the stock exchange, do many, many things. But Data Bank also gives investment to pharmaceutical companies here to develop the pharmaceutical sector. Should Data Bank not be giving incentives to allow them to invest in the pharmaceutical sector in this country? Should be treated like a hedge fund from Europe, because unfortunately, in the investment rules, portfolio investment is allowed. In other words, people can come and buy shares in our stock exchange, and they'll be treated the same way. No discrimination, nothing in that national treatment. Or take, say, Agricultural Development Bank versus Standard Chartered Bank. Agricultural Development Bank still maintains some rural branches. Standard Chartered has closed all its rural branches. So it would not be, is it not useful to say, for instance, that we shall give some special exemptions and incentives to Agricultural Development Bank to keep rural branches open? And is it wrong to do that and discriminate in that sense against Standard Chartered? Now, the list can go on. So I'm giving but the most important thing is that this tool, the right to discriminate, should have been maintained. But even before the Ghana government has signed any international treaty which forces to do it, the Ghana government is fighting against it. We are giving up that tool already by ourselves. And many countries in the world will not agree to do that. So my third point, I've got 5 more minutes, I think, or 4.
4 minutes, 50 seconds.
Thank you very much. Is this. Now, if you look in the bill, you could see that, okay, in a certain sense, the things that I've told you now about the bill is not the fault of this new revision, right? It is something that they've carried on from the first bill from the PNDC time, PNDC law 1984 to the 1994 Act to this Act. It's not new. It's basically just retained them. But you could also say that there's a third element about what do you do. You could have this framework that is informed by liberalization, even though I don't think it's a good idea, and still say, I'm going to make some strategic exceptions inside. If you look at the early PNDC law, it made some exceptions as to some areas which are available to Ghanaians alone to work in. Now, but 20 years after the PNDC law and the 20 years after the 1994 Act, things have changed. We all know that it's not enough simply to say that hawkers or hawking is the area that must be left to Ghanaians. There are many things that have moved on, for instance. Unfortunately, this is a place where I think that the current bill does not help us at all. And let me give you, I want to spend a bit more time here. Because if you look at the current bill, and I've done some comparative analysis here, what it does is basically say that sale of goods in the market, hawking, petty trading, protected for Ghanaians. Taxi and car hiring for a car not more than, if you don't, an enterprise that's not more than 20 cars reserved for Ghanaians. Beauty salons, scratch cards, manufacturing of scratch cards in Ghana for MTN and co reserved for Ghanaians. And then, in addition, stationery exercise books, manufactured for Ghanaians, the retail of finished pharmaceutical products reserved for Ghanaians, sachet water, betting and things are reserved for Ghanaians. Okay. Now, in a certain sense, if you look at it, it's not a very dynamic conception. I'll give an example. You say car hiring, right? For 20 and below, reserved for Ghanaians. Now, what if I came into the economy and set up a car hiring manufacturer, a car hiring firm of, say, 50 cars, 30 cars? I'll obliterate whatever car hiring firms locally are here because it's a scale question. In fact, in some places in the world that I know, when they are inviting local foreigners to come and operate car hiring services, they restrict them. They say, you can only go from the airport to the hotel. And from this, you can go this route and this route and this route. In other words, I'll give you an example of how the notion of what should be restricted to Ghanaians is not dynamic. It reminds me of the colonial times when the colonial government was taking land for mining corporation. It reserved as very useful for Ghanaians, the place that they can collect firewood and worship their juju gods as a very Ghanaian enterprise. But you see, I'm putting on this thing because you see, this bill that we have now has evolved. From the information that we have, there was an even better attempt by the original drafters of the bill to add more things to this exemption, even more exemptions. For instance, there was an attempt to ensure that retailing of internet bandwidth and mobile telephony was restricted. Importation, distribution of pharmaceutical products was restricted. Freight forwarding, the attempt to ensure that these ways were excluded and restricted for Ghanaians, for instance. Unfortunately, from what we know, and then some other areas were restricted where foreigners cannot participate unless they have 30% equity requirement. For instance, the services sector, first service related to oil, gas, mineral sector, manufacture of generic drugs. Now, these things, and I can see the shepherds there shaking their head. Let me take my time. Because if you look at the penultimate bill that was before Parliament, before it was approved for this one, you will find a memorandum of it that they were attempting to ensure that mining sector is also restricted in a very way for Ghanaians. What happened is that between the earlier draft and what we have today, the European Union intervened. The European Union said, over my dead body. These things that you are talking about, restricting 30% for Ghanaian, restricting participating in the oil and gas sector for foreigners unless they have 30% equity shares, we disagree. This thing that you are, so they made objections to many areas of these kind of things, and lo and behold, they fell out of the final bill. Since I don't have enough time, I'm just provoking that. So what I'm suggesting is that, in fact, even within the